everyone, this is Miss Sharma. I'm really happy to be able to spend this dear time with you reading a story. I've chosen to read the short story Games at Twilight by Anita Desai because I really like the adventurous side to it. So let's begin. It was still too hot to play outdoors. They had had their tea, they had been washed and had their hair brushed. And after a long day of confinement in the house that was not cool, but at least a protection from the sun, the children strained to get out. Their faces were red and bloated with the effort, but their mother would not open the door. Everything was still curtained and shuttered in a way that stifled the children, made them feel that their lungs were stuffed with cotton wool and their noses with dust. And if they didn't burst out into the light and see the sun and feel the air, they would choke. "Please, Ma, please," they begged. "We'll play in the veranda and porch. We won't go a step out of the porch." "You will, I know you will, and then—" "No, we won't. They wailed so horrendously that she actually let down the bolt of the front door so that they burst out like seeds from a crackling, overripe pod into the veranda with such wild, maniacal yells that she retreated to her bath and the shower of talcum powder and the fresh sari that were to help her face the summer evening. They faced the afternoon. It was too hot, too bright. The white walls of the veranda glared stridently in the sun. Bougainvillea hung about it, purple and magenta in livid balloons. The garden outside was like a tray made of beaten brass, flattened out on the red gravel and the stony soil in all shades of metal, aluminium, tin, copper, and brass. No life stirred at this arid time of day. The birds still drooped, like dead fruit, in the papery tents of the trees. Some squirrels lay limp on the wet earth under the garden tap. The outdoor dog lay stretched as if dead on the veranda mat, his paws and ears and tail all reaching out like dying travellers in search of water. He rolled his eyes at the children, two white marbles rolling in the purple sockets, begging for sympathy, and attempted to lift his tail in a wag, but could not. It only twitched and lay still. Then, perhaps roused by the shrieks of the children, a band of parrots suddenly fell out of the eucalyptus tree, tumbled frantically in the still, sizzling air, then sorted themselves out into battle formation and streaked away across the white sky. The children, too, felt released. They, too, began tumbling, shoving, pushing against each other, frantic to start. Start what? Start their business. The business of the children's day, which is play. "Let's play hide and seek." "Who'll be it?" "You be it." "Why should I? You be. You're the eldest. That doesn't mean—" The shoves became harder. Some kicked out. The motherly mirror intervened. She pulled the boys roughly apart. There was a tearing sound of cloth, but it was lost in the heavy panting and angry grumbling, and no one paid attention to the small sleeve hanging loosely off a shoulder. Make a circle, she shouted, firmly pulling and pushing till a kind of vague circle was formed. "Now clap," she roared, and clapping, they all chanted in melancholy unison, "Dip, dip, dip, my blue ship," and every now and then one or the other saw he was safe by the way his hands fell at the crucial moment, palm on palm or back of hand on palm, and dropped out of the circle with a yell and a jump of relief and jubilation. Raghu was it. He started to protest, to cry, "You cheated! Meera cheated! Anu cheated!" But it was too late. The others had already streaked away. There was no one to hear when he called out, "Only in the veranda, the porch. Ma said to stay in the porch." No one had stopped to listen. All he saw were their brown legs flashing through the dusty shrubs, scrambling up brick walls, leaping over compost heaps and hedges, and then the porch stood empty in the purple shade of the bougainvillea, and the garden was as empty as before. Even the limp squirrels had whisked away, leaving everything gleaming, brassy, and bare. Only small Manu suddenly reappeared, as if he had dropped out of an invisible cloud or from a bird's claws, and stood for a moment in the centre of the yellow lawn, chewing his finger, and near to tears as he heard Raghu shouting with his head pressed against the veranda wall, 83, 85, 89, 90, and then made off in a panic, half of him wanting to fly north, the other half counselling south. Raghu turned just in time to see the flash of his white shorts and the uncertain skittering of his red sandals, and charged after him with such a blood-curdling yell that Manu stumbled over the hosepipe, fell into its rubber coils, and lay there weeping. "I won't be it! You have to find them all! "I know I have to, idiot," Raghu said, superciliously, kicking him with his toe. "You're dead," he said with satisfaction, licking the beads of perspiration off his upper lip, and then stalked off in search of worthier prey, whistling spiritedly so that the hiders should hear and tremble. Ravi heard the whistling and picked his nose in a panic, trying to find comfort by burrowing the finger deep into that soft tunnel. He felt himself too exposed, sitting on an upturned flower pot behind the garage. Where could he burrow? He could run around the garage if he heard Raghu come, around and around and around, but he hadn't much faith in his short legs when matched against Raghu's long, hefty, hairy footballer legs. Ravi had a frightening glimpse of them as Raghu combed the hedge of crotons and hibiscus, trampling delicate ferns underfoot as he did so. Ravi looked about him, desperately, swallowing a small ball of snot in his fear. The garage was locked with a great heavy lock, to which the driver had the key in his room, hanging from a nail on the wall under his work shirt. Ravi had peeped in and seen him still sprawling on his string cot in his vest and striped underpants, the hair on his chest and the hair in his nose shaking with the vibrations of his phlegm-obstructed snores. Ravi had wished he were tall enough, big enough to reach the key on the nail, but it was impossible, beyond his reach for years to come. He had sidled away and sat dejectedly on the flower pot. That, at least, was cut to his own size. But next to the garage was another shed with a big green door, also locked. No one even knew who had the key to turn the lock. That shed wasn't opened more than once a year, when Ma turned out all the old broken bits of furniture and rolls of matting and leaking buckets, and the white anthers were broken and swept away, and Flit sprayed into the spider webs and rat holes, so that the whole operation was like the looting of a poor, ruined and conquered city. The green leaves of the door sagged. They were nearly off their rusty hinges. The hinges were large and made a small gap between the door and the walls, only just large enough for rats, dogs, and possibly Ravi to slip through. Ravi had never cared to enter such a dark and depressing mortuary of defunct household goods, seething with such unspeakable and alarming animal life, but as Raghu's whistling grew angrier and sharper, and his crashing and storming in the hedge wilder, Ravi suddenly slipped off the flower pot and through the crack, and was gone. He chuckled aloud with astonishment at his own temerity, so that Raghu came out of the hedge, stood silent with his hands on his hips, listening, and finally shouted, "I heard you! I'm coming! Got you!" and came charging round the garage, only to find the upturned flower pot, the yellow dust, the crawling of white ants in a mud hill against the closed shed door. Nothing. Snarling, he bent to pick up a stick and went off, whacking it against the garage and shed walls as if to beat out his prey. Ravi shook, then shivered with delight, with self-congratulation, also with fear. It was dark, spooky in the shed. It had a muffled smell as of graves. Ravi had once got locked into the linen cupboard and sat there weeping for half an hour before he was rescued. But at least that had been a familiar place, and even smelled pleasantly of starch, laundry, and, reassuringly, of his mother. But the shed smelled of rats, ant hills, dust, and spider webs, also of less definable, less recognisable horrors, and it was dark. Except for the white-hot cracks along the door, there was no light. The roof was very low. Although Ravi was small, he felt as if he could reach up and touch it with his fingertips. But he didn't stretch. He hunched himself into a ball so as not to bump into anything, touch or feel anything. What might there not be to touch him and feel him as he stood there, trying to see in the dark? Something cold or slimy, like a snake. Snakes! He leapt up as Raghu whacked the wall with his stick. Then, quickly realising what it was, felt almost relieved to hear his stick. It made him feel protected. But Raghu soon moved away. There wasn't a sound once his footsteps had gone around the garage and disappeared. Ravi stood frozen inside the shed. Then he shivered all over. Something had tickled the back of his neck. It took him a while to pick up the courage to lift his hand and explore. It was an insect, perhaps a spider, exploring him. He squashed it and wondered how many more creatures were watching him, waiting to reach out and touch him, the stranger. There was nothing now. After standing in that position, his hands still on his neck, feeling the wet splodge of the squashed spider gradually dry. For minutes, hours, his legs began to tremble with the effort, the inaction. By now he could see enough into the dark to make out the large solid shapes of old wardrobes, broken buckets, and bedsteads piled on top of each other around him. He recognised an old bathtub. Patches of enamel glimmered at him, and at last he lowered himself onto its edge. He contemplated slipping out of the shed and into the fray. He wondered if it would not be better to be captured by Raghu and be returned to the milling crowd as long as he could be in the sun, the light, the free spaces of the garden, and the familiarity of his brothers, sisters, and cousins. It would be evening soon. Their games would become legitimate. The parents would sit out on the lawn on cane basket chairs and watch them as they tore around the garden or gathered into knots to share loot of mulberries or black teeth splitting jamon from the garden